Paul Rhoads, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So the way I typically begin this, and we've already kind of discussed this, but I like to introduce the guest and set the groundwork for why we're having this conversation. And our interactions have primarily been through X, and that's how I am familiar with you. You have the handle Paul Talk. You do a lot of not only painting but art criticism, and you can correct me if you feel like I get any of this wrong or paint this unfairly. But there's been a lot of chafing I've noticed with some of the not only colleagues but friends of mine that I have on X, Art Dino, Ruxandra, Damien Chavez. I saw you were starting to get into it a little bit with Robert Rust, the composer, things like this. And rather than go back and forth on X, I thought it would be interesting to talk to you as close to in person as possible. Obviously, I'm in the United States, you're in France. And before we get into any of that, because I do want to cover the X behavior, I want to cover some of the debate that you are currently involved in with Fen and Sam on the Decadent Serpent account. But before we do any of that, I wanted you to first introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we can go from there.
Well, I'm the product of the New York art world of the 50s and 60s. My parents were both artists. My father is the artist George Rhoads, who's known for his ball machines. He got quite famous, but he was never accepted in the art world for that. But he was well known for that. But he was a painter. He did all kinds of paintings. And I had a lot of teachers, but my main teacher was a man named Aaron Curzon, who was Marcel Duchamp's first, you could say, American disciple. And he's not known, but he was the guy from whom the neo-Dadaists learned about Duchamp and learned about Dada. And I tried to have a painting career in New York all through the 70s and 80s. And I finally gave up and came to France, where I was able to get into sculpture because there's a lot of stone here to carve. And I've done a lot of other things. I've composed music, and I was the conceptor and editor-in-chief of the Jack Vance Integral Edition. And I started making YouTube videos about 10 years ago. I've been kicked off YouTube twice, the second time a few months ago, and I'll probably never go back. So now if I do videos, I post them on Odyssey.
Why did you get kicked off YouTube twice?
Well, the first time, I follow the YouTube rules, but the first time I was kicked off by being mass flagged by Chinese agents, and I've documented that in videos which are on Odyssey. And last time I was kicked off by a group of classical realist painters more or less connected with the painter David Casson. So it was both times, it wasn't YouTube that kicked me off, but it was mass flagging, because anybody who's mass flagged, especially if you're a small account like I was, you can't defend yourself against the algorithm at that point. They just don't want trouble.
Mm. You said you moved to France. Why did your painting career not take off in New York, or why do you think it didn't take off in New York, and why did you feel the need to
move to France? My orientation was, let's just say, traditional. And this, if you're a younger person, you didn't live this, representational painting was completely on the outs, starting from the mid-60s. And that interdiction lasted very strongly up into the early 90s. In fact, it wasn't an interdiction against images of things. But it was certainly an interdiction, looking back on it, on any kind of painting that looked in some way or another traditional, which mine always did. So I went to France, and I went to a small town in France where unsophisticated people bought my paintings. And that's how I made a living.
More specifically, and you can feel free to be
Yeah.
as specific or not as you want.
Yeah.
Why did people connect with your paintings in France? I mean, do you have family over there, or I guess that's where you are now? But
No, it just because I went to a little town, and I painted pretty landscapes, and a town called Chinon, which is a very pretty place, and I painted pretty landscapes and still lives that people bought to decorate their houses, and they didn't sell for a lot of money, but I was able to sell them. And that kind of thing didn't go over in New York, where I was painting landscapes of Central Park or the city, or I tried to have a career as a portrait artist. And I'm not sure why they didn't want me. I guess because already then the portrait painting was quite photographic.
And you said you were also a sculptor and composer. How did you get into sculpting and composing along with painting?
Well, I got into sculpting a lot because in France has all this stone you can easily carve, and you can get it easily. So suddenly I had all the material I needed to sculpt. So I started doing a lot of sculpting. The composing thing is stranger. I grew up around music. My mother's a pianist and very connected in the New York music world and so on. So I had a very, very musical upbringing, and I tried to compose, but it's a rather strange story, not really apropos. But I started learning to play the cello. I'm a super amateur, beginner level cellist, but I won't tell the story, but I discovered that I could compose, and the first piece I composed was a little concertino for cello. And then, amazed that I could do that, I thought I'd try something harder, so I composed some cello suites, which I considered to be harder. And then I started composing all sorts of things. And a few of my piano pieces have been recorded. They're on YouTube, and I wrote a jazz concerto for 4 solo instruments and orchestra, which was actually performed here, but it was a total botch. It remains a very painful experience in my life. And I had some other of my music was performed, but I wrote a ton of music. And then I had a stroke. And the only effect of the stroke was that I couldn't understand music anymore. I could hear it, but I couldn't understand it. And the understanding has come back. I can now listen to music and understand it, but I haven't been able to compose music again.
Well, I have seen, let me back up. Obviously, whenever I have a guest on, anything that I can do on my end to go into their work and try and get a good sense of who I'm talking to, that's how I like to prepare. So if it's conversations that they've had, articles that they've written, videos that they've created, I will try and do my best to consume as much of that content and try and get a sense of who it is that I'll be speaking to. That way, because one of the issues with conversations like this is that I've heard it joked that the conversation begins once that first hour has been crossed. But with these sorts of conversations, well, it's about an hour that we have to talk. Sometimes it goes over, but generally speaking, it's about an hour, and that's just when you get to know the person. So if I can do anything on my end to speed that up, that's how I prepare. And I had seen the video where you were talking about composing a cello suite and some of the frustrations that comes with the process of composition, but not only composition, also the technical requirements that are needed in order to form something like a cello suite, which I thought was very relatable, and I do understand that frustration and process as a cellist myself. Obviously, that's something that I can relate to. Now, just jumping right in. Right now, you are embroiled, dramatic term, in a debate with Fen, who is the British sculptor, Sam, Art Dino, and then I know Damien Chavez has chimed in as well on Art Deco. Now, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on Art Deco because I'm not a painter. This is not a art period that I'm well versed enough in to have any strong
But
stance on.
it isn't. The debate isn't really about Art Deco as a style.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind filling in people who would be listening from your perspective, why is this debate important? I think that would help reach audiences that might not be familiar with this subject.
Yeah, because if it weren't important, I wouldn't bother with it. And it actually started up with Damien several months ago. I sent you one of the videos related to that. It has to do with the Heideggerian mindset that everybody's in, that I think is a complete disaster. And that is that instead of looking at art, and this goes for music, it goes for literature, it goes for everything, instead of looking at these things as things in themselves that are human activities, they're looked upon as cultural phenomenon. And culture is understood from this Heideggerian point of view as a function of time. In other words, what was going on 300 years ago, that was a culture, and it produced all these things. We are now in a different time. All that stuff is irrelevant to us. We can look at it, we can maybe understand some things, but it's not really important to us. This is our time, and art is going to be what we make of it. Well, that idea really took hold more than half a century ago. It was building for a long time, but by now it's completely ossified. Everybody's got that idea. They see art as a cultural phenomenon, and they're not thinking about art as a thing that you do that has a certain nature, but as somehow they have to either be the philosopher of the future who is going to set down the parameters of what art is, or else they have to tap into the zeitgeist and be the expression of it. So Sam and Fen, I've been, Fen has blocked me on Twitter for a long time, and that's because when I first discovered him, when he was, I guess this was years ago now, I engaged with him right away because what he was doing was something very strange. Which was, in one way, at that time he was talking about futurism. He wanted to revive futurism. Now he's talking more Art Deco. And there's a relation there. In fact, those things all come out of Cubism, and Cubism comes out of Cézanne. I mean, so Fen was doing these sculptures, which were, it was a little bit like, Fen, obviously, all these guys, people have artistic sensibility. Having artistic talent and artistic sensibility is not what counts. What counts is what you do with it. So Fen was using his artistic sensibility to revive futurism as he was thinking about it. So I was engaging with him. I feel like I understand these things. So, and I was taken care of by the artists like Aaron Curzon and other artists when I was young. And that's how art works. You know, the older people take care of the younger people. So I feel, because of how much I was helped, I do my best to help people like Fen and Sam. And of course, it's not happening the way it happened when I was young. I would go to these people and drink their words. Today, it's different. Today, I have to, it happens on internet, and I have to try to, in different ways, try to engage with them to try to see if eventually they might be receptive to what I think they've got to start understanding. Now, Fen, you'll notice that his last sculpture, which he's calling Art Deco, and he's still putting in these Heideggerian ideas and so on, but he's loosened up from this cubism thing that he's doing. So I don't think that I've had an influence on him, but I think that's a good development. So maybe I've wandered a little bit off the question, but what I'm trying to do is attack what I think is a situation that has the thing that has killed art and that continues to live in the minds of practically everybody. And I feel that unless people change their orientation, they're not going to be able to get anywhere. And so now there's this idea, well, we're going to revive Art Deco. And I don't know if you read my contributions to the discourse, but and it's a little bit ironic because all my life people have looked at my paintings and they've said, "Oh, well, you're reviving the past. You're just redoing the past," which I never thought I was doing. I never was trying to imitate any particular painter. I was just influenced by all these painters and trying to do my best. And now I'm saying to these guys, you can't make Art Deco live again. It's something that happened back then for all kinds of reasons. And I explain in this last issue, for instance, that part of Art Deco, the spirit of Art Deco, was a spirit of enthusiasm. They loved technology back then. Technological things were great. It was before the atom bomb. They loved it. Machines were beautiful, and also everything was, even in America, there was more and more socialism, and there was going to be a paradise. So it expresses all that, all this technology and these political ideas. And so Art Deco is this happy kind of thing. But we're not happy now. I mean, I try to be happy, and I try to express happy things in my painting, but we're in a different world. And so we're not going to, and also Art Deco was related to techniques of the time, the kinds of things they were doing, and a lot of it was manufactured stuff. So people do that. Like every now and then somebody designs a car, or I know in France it was probably the same thing in America. A few years ago they were putting out all these retro designed toasters and other kitchen things, and it was a little fad that lasted for a while. But of course now the technology can do all these incredible things that couldn't be done in the 20s and 30s. So the idea of reviving Art Deco, really what Sam wants and what Fen wants, is they want cultural rejuvenation. They want to have a vibrant art life. And they're always talking about getting patrons to buy things and getting museums interested and so on. Whereas you know about the art world and the music world we have now. It's a very strange, and it's what it is. It's not so great. And there's all this crap going on. You've just done these podcasts about this racism stuff and DEI stuff. I mean, what does that have to do with anything? Was there ever anything like that in the whole history of art? We're so far away from even thinking about art with these things. I mean, and most of this stuff that's presented as art, as far as I'm concerned, isn't art at all. So,
well, let me jump in there for a second and try and put up a couple flags to help orient this conversation. You mentioned, I'll take this in reverse order. You had mentioned the podcast that I've done. Certainly, there has been an element of criticism to not only the work that I've done, but the work that people that I've brought on have done. But one of the things that I've been trying to push as well in the podcast is that what we're doing is not just criticism. That criticism is easy. It's why in the first 10 episodes, each episode ends with the question, what is a positive vision for the future that the guest is trying to manifest? And what I'm trying to do is for each 10 episodes have a different ending theme to the podcast episodes. But one of the things that has come up recently, Disney, the company, is trying to bring back artists to do hand-drawn animation rather than CGI animation, like Pixar and things like that. And what they're discovering is not that they don't want to do that, but people don't know how to do that. With artists like Fen, as an example, and I really like his work. As a side tangent, one of the things that I really appreciate about not only his art, but his orientation is that there is a rejuvenation of masculinity in art, which is something that I'm very much for. I would like to see a return of masculine energy to art because a lot of it, in my view, has become effeminate, particularly in music, which is where my training is, but not exclusively. And one of the things that Fen has commented on, and I agree with him, is that there is this love for something like classical art, but so many people don't even know how to do classical art anymore. And I think he was referencing Greek sculptures, that's an art form that has not entirely, but largely been lost. And anything I say, if he's listening, anything that I say, he's welcome to correct. But he had said, and this is the part that I agree with, I'm going somewhere with this. In order to revive art for the future, we need to look to the past. And in my field, that would be something like going back to Baroque music. Most people don't even know how to compose anymore. So we have to go back to what is melody, what is harmony, what's a proper chord progression, how do we write a symphony? That was one of the conversations that I had with Stephen Limbaugh, who's currently working on the next great American
I
symphony.
listened to that.
Yeah, and what he's doing is incredible, and he's putting forward this artwork that most people don't know how to do. As we've discussed earlier, composition is very difficult, and I think that that's a better way of understanding why looking to the past helps orient us towards the future. I'm not a traditional conservative in this sense. While I'm very sympathetic to conservatism, the primary orientation of a conservative is to conserve things. And that is important. And I'm not trying to knock that or denigrate that. That's important. But I am also interested in what is the new art that we can find and latch onto to help guide us and shape the culture. And in order to do that, you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to look to the past. Now, I want to address one other thing, because you had mentioned Fen had blocked you on X. And I would say Fen is not the only example. And if you don't mind,
No,
I'd like
no.
to. I had. Well, I'll get to that in a second.
He did participate in the Art Deco debate.
Yes, yes.
So
So obviously, there's not an unwillingness to interact.
no. So I was very glad to see that.
But Fen would not be an isolated example. Like Ruxandra, who
I have, I'm blocked by several people.
Yes, Ruxandra, whom I have a great amount of respect and admiration for. She's not just a colleague, but a friend who doesn't have a problem with anybody, which is why I take it seriously when she says, "Oh yeah, this is not someone that I want any association."
Who is she?
Ruxandra of Daco Romana. She recently got her PhD in, I think it was geoscience, but she's also an artist, and she is connected into a lot of the emerging underground coalition of artists that are beginning to come together, as an example.
What's her Twitter handle?
Rixandra, I think it's Classical Odyssey. Rixandra of
Oh, Classical Odyssey. Okay,
yeah.
I know who she is.
And then obviously there's
Well,
been some back and forth with Damien Chavez as well.
oh boy.
Right.
Well, Damien.
Yes.
Damien
Who's also a friend, by the
is
way.
not a nice person.
Uh,
Well, he's not a nice person.
Let me hang on a minute. I have to I have to push back on that. He is
Go ahead.
certainly feisty, no question about that. And
Well, he's willing to be consistently impolite.
I don't want to approach this.
I mean, that's just a fact.
Look,
he's got that willingness.
Yeah, well, certainly the willingness to be impolite, the willingness to fight, which is a high T sort of masculine trait, which I find commendable and respectable. I would say from the interactions I've seen, it's not like. Let me put this politely. There are no victims in this story. There's certainly been plenty of.
Listen, you don't have to hold back with me. I'm so masculine that I.
Well, what is that line from Kingsman? Manners maketh man, and I you know, I will say, as a compliment, I don't like a lot of the, and I and you can correct this and we can get into this. I would identify it as a sort of troll behavior, but on the flip end of that,
I'll say this. I consider myself the number one troll of the internet, and I'll talk about that for just a second.
Sure.
You probably don't know who Jack Vance is.
The name sounds familiar, but you'll have to.
Jack Vance is one of the greatest writers of the 20th century and one of the greatest writers of all time, who was never promoted because he wasn't left-wing enough, and is imitated by hundreds of writers. And I conceived and was the editor of the Vance Integral Edition starting in 2000. And it took 6 years to do this. And it was a volunteer online project. And as soon as it got going, and I was new to the internet, it was constantly under attack. But in order for it to function, it had to remain open and on the internet. So for 6 years, I was the focus of the most unbelievable slanders and operations, and I won't go into it. But as a result, I had to learn how to operate on the internet. And my skills as a troll are without parallel. But I'm not a, I never provoke, I don't do any provocation that doesn't come from, that doesn't have a serious purpose and isn't fundamentally benevolent. So
okay,
I very, very often, after people are furious with me, they turn around and become friends. But I understand this has happened to me a lot.
Well, let me. The compliment I was going to say. One of my issues with X in general is that there are a lot of anonymous accounts that claim to be art experts that don't actually do any art themselves. And I don't mind naming them. Cultural Explorer would be one. Muse would be another one. And I don't know the name. I don't actually know who she is, but I've spoken to her and she's a nice person. So it's not a personal animus I have towards it. It's just the principle of the thing. I don't think it's wise to continuously support anonymous accounts that claim to be experts but don't actually put out any art themselves. I think that that's just rife with problems that are going to manifest and rear their heads in ugly ways. And I think that people should be on guard about that. And one of the things that, again, well, I think in general, troll behavior is reprehensible. You're not doing this anonymously. Your name is there, your face is there, and you're willing to stand by the words that you put towards people. And that is an admirable trait, and I do respect that. I think that's one of the reasons why we're talking. Yes.
And I show my work.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and we were going to,
I show my work.
and I did want to address that. One of the things that I've noticed, along with the, let's say, provocative post, there is what seems to me, from my perspective, to be a sort of denigration of somebody else's work in support of posting your own. As an example, recently, this was just the other day with Robert Rust, and I don't want to misquote you. Hang on, let me pull this up real quick. It had to do with the piece Spiegel im Spiegel, which I agree, by the way, is a very simplistic. I like the piece because of the meaning that it conveys, but it is a very simplistic, sort of minimalist piece.
You're gonna have to refresh me, because
Sure.
that says something to me, but I don't remember exactly.
Sure. Robert, who will be coming on the podcast at some point, he's another composer, very positive oriented individual, which is why I wanted to speak to him in the first place. He had reposted a performance of mine, because I occasionally will post a full performance of my work on X. And
I've watched several.
Yeah, thank you. And the piece that I had posted was Spiegel im Spiegel by Arvo Part.
Oh, right.
And
okay.
you had commented, and I'm quoting, "I've had a bunch of Parts music inflicted on me. I'd love to find something to love, but it's a sorry excuse for music. I've had to write my own." And then you include a link to your own compositions. And the way that I read posts like that, it's like, this art is not as good as what I can do. Look at me. And that orientation towards art, to me, reads as narcissistic. And the reason that I say that is because, and I had this conversation with Arsenty Haritonov, who's another amazing Russian composer and brilliant pianist. When we put our art out there, the orientation that I try to do this in, and other artists as well, is to orient it towards that which is of the highest transcendental values. So this would be truth, beauty, and goodness. And if successful, the art is what will be at the centerpiece of the focus, not the artist. Like, if nobody remembered my name, if nobody remembered my performances, but they remembered the brilliant music, the brilliant compositions, and my name is lost to the ends of time, that is a win. Because ultimately, it's not about me at all. Like, I have very little to do with the art that is that I'm acting as a conduit for. And the opposite side of that spectrum would be, no, I, the artist, am important. Look at what I can do. Look at me. And if the posts are, this art is bad, I'm good, look at what I'm doing, that reads to me as a perverted inverse of what the purpose of art is supposed to be. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. Is that fair? Am I being...
I don't sign my paintings. And that's been a big problem, with selling them and so on. I mean, sometimes people bully me into doing it, but because I can't stand how much ego there is in art. And when it comes to Arvo Part, I mean, it's nice music, but to me, it's really sad when the best music. I mean, some of Ligeti is good, but a lot of it I find very tedious, and I find Arvo Part extremely tedious. It's not. Music should be exciting and wonderful, and so Arvo Part has become a big name, and I am nobody, totally nobody, and no one has heard my music. So it's very easy to make a criticism of music like Arvo Part or anything, and then who the hell are you to do that? So I show who I am. I did this. So obviously I can understand how you would react that way, but given my situation, it's the only way not to bring attention to myself, but to bring attention to what I think is important. Musical qualities that I think are important, or artistic qualities that I think are important. Now, this I'd like to go back to something you said about going back to the past and reviving art and Greek sculpture and so on. Well, to me, this gets to the nerve of the issue. Damien Chavez is a good example. But there are lots of other examples. People are sure that because they love this thing so much, Damien with his idea of classical art. Well, I was lucky enough to receive a certain education that other people haven't received. And I realized certain things that were always just obvious given the education I received that these people just aren't seeing. And so some people have become receptive, and they've learned some of these things from me. But for the most part, a guy like Damien, he has got a lot more influence than I've got. And
why do you think that is? Actually, let me scratch that because Damien's a friend, and I don't want to speak for the man. He can do that himself. Let me ask you a broader question. What, in your view, is the role and purpose of criticism?
Well, I mean, that depends. I don't think, criticism isn't exactly a thing. Well, now, criticism has become hagiography. Nobody puts anything down. Nobody says that's wrong. That's become, you can't do that anymore because now everybody's a creator, and what everybody creates is valid. I mean, you want masculinity, for instance. You want some guts in art. You want something that's has some fire and muscle in it. Okay. So are you willing to point to the things which really lack that and say, this art is lacking something, and this is what it is, and this is what it should have? Nobody's willing to do that. Nobody is willing to stand up and say what they think is right. So you talk about truth and goodness and these things, but at the same time, are you willing to, put yourself on the front line and risk taking some hits? Because that's what's involved.
Certainly.
Damien isn't afraid to take hits.
That's true.
Because, I consider, I try to like Damien, and I've complimented him on what I think is admirable in his art, but I think I've beat him up pretty badly. I think he feels pretty knocked around by me, and I'm sorry about that. But he's a big boy.
Yeah, well, we don't have to dive into that. I don't think we're going to find much agreement there.
No.
I want to go back to criticism for a moment. Yes, certainly being willing to call out things that are not true. Absolutely, of course.
And things that are ugly, and things that are unhealthy, things that are deleterious, things that are socially reprehensible.
Sure, no question about that. But criticism in a vacuum is sort of like a sledgehammer. And there's a risk that
that's what we live in, a vacuum. I mean, unless somebody starts knocking something down so that there starts to be some terrain
in here, I think
that we can orient ourselves on.
Well, here I think this is probably where we can identify just a fundamental difference. I don't see criticism in a vacuum. So just to kind of give you some background on me for a moment, because I don't, only because it doesn't come up So I am a Christian. My approach to art is from a Christian orientation. So criticism in a vacuum, that's sort of like an oxymoronic sentence. I don't see how criticism can exist in a vacuum because everything has to be in reference to something else.
Oh,
So,
absolutely,
so
absolutely.
uh,
I'm a Christian myself.
well, okay.
I'm a Christian myself.
Then perhaps this will resonate. Criticism oriented towards bringing out the best in individuals. Like as an example, when I was in college doing my bachelor's and master's in music performance, we have what's called a studio class where all the cellists of the studio get together and a few people perform, and we offer criticism, but not criticism in that sort of troll sledgehammer manner. It's criticism wielded almost as a scalpel, trying to, or if
Yeah,
you imagine,
but David, here you are, a group of cellists. You all have studied music. You all know something about your instrument, and you know the repertory, and you're sort of all on the same page, and you're all going in the same direction. Well, in painting, it's very different. It's very, very different. And
how is it different? Could you help
and
me
the
understand that?
well, it's different because in classical music, a guy like you master something. You master your cello. You can open a page of music and you can play it, and you know a lot about what that means. Because it means more than just having the notes come out. It means giving the music, and so you've gone through an apprenticeship, and you have this. You have been initiated into music. Well, in painting, the basic education was destroyed over half a century ago. I was very lucky to come in to fall into scraps of it that were left over. So I'm now I'm starting to get old, but I was one of the few people who of my generation who got the old education that does not exist anymore, because what they teach in these classical realist ateliers is not drawing and would not have been considered drawing in the 19th century. So that's the context that I'm bringing. I'm trying to alert people to this problem. And it's very complicated because what's happened, particularly with the classical realists, I mean, let's not talk about the contemporary artists. I mean, they're all over the place. But these people who want to revive tradition, they think they've done it because they've defined it narrowly, and they are fulfilling these narrow criteria that they take to be the traditional thing. And so they're very self-satisfied. They do these things, these flashy, wonderful things, and they think it's great. And they even consider that what they're doing is better because their criteria are being fulfilled, and it's just too narrow. It's not the real thing. It's as if people started playing the cello as if they were a computer readout of music, without any of the feeling that you have to have, without any understanding that notes aren't just a pitch and a length of time and a forte or piano or whatever, and a certain dynamic, but they're part of something that's happening. They're indications of a musical movement. It's as if that's what playing music had become. That's just a sort of a rough analogy to try to give you an idea.
Going back to some of your interactions with these artists, it doesn't seem obvious to me that troll, rage bait, provocation is
Well, that's not what I do. I mean, what I do.
Do you think that it's fair to say that they would characterize you as doing that?
Well, no, obviously, I don't always succeed, and or I'm, not understood the way I'd like to be understood. I'm not saying that I do this perfectly, but when I see something that I think might have promise, when I see something and where I think that maybe I could in some way be helpful, not necessarily to that person, but to the people who are witnessing the conversation. Sometimes I try to do something. So
if you'll allow me, and I think that this,
yeah,
I'd like to tell you.
I will.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you a very brief story, and I think it will help illustrate my point. And I want to get your reaction to this. I'm 26 now. I'm turning 27 in November. So this would have, I was 19 when I was a camp counselor. So this would have been 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago. I worked at a summer camp for several months, living at the camp, working with kids, teenagers, and also interacting with a lot of the other camp counselors. One of the flags I learned to identify in conversation very quickly was when I would interact with somebody and they would say something along the lines of, "Oh, yes, well, everywhere I go, there's always drama. Everywhere I go, people always misunderstand me." And just thinking about that, the odds of everybody misunderstanding, or the majority of people misunderstanding, or the majority of people taking your words out of context can happen, but statistically is unlikely. And whenever I hear, well, these my words have been taken out of context, whenever I hear something like people just continuously misunderstand me, I'm less inclined to think that it's all the people and it's actually just the individual. It's the same thing in something like the incel community, where it's, they'll say something like, "Oh, well, it's all the women that are the problem. All the
No,
women are."
David, what I said was that I don't always succeed.
Sure. But if
People. I'm not blaming others, and so I do get through to some people. I have gotten through to some people, and sometimes I don't succeed. But it's not that I blame myself if people don't take things the way I'd like them to take. I understand that, but especially on Twitter, because YouTube was much better, because especially with my first channel, it was wonderful to interact with people on YouTube, and the comment section was really fluid and great. And I could do videos and reaction videos, and it was possible to get into interactions with people more fully. Twitter is complicated. It's just these little flashes. So I do the best I can, and of course I piss off some people. But I'm quite masculine, so that's okay. It's I'm kidding you, but it's not so serious. To me, it's just not that serious if people get pissed off. It's
and certainly, I mean, there's a healthy. If I haven't done anything wrong and people are still upset, there's obviously that factor to take into account. One of the ways I have found, one of the tactics rather I have found to be effective in communication is, instead of wielding criticism like a sledgehammer, inviting people, operating from an orientation of invitation rather than assertion.
I mean, I think I do that. I think I do that. I mean, sometimes, with a guy like Damien, who is like an attack dog, sometimes I'll bite back a little bit, but not that none of this makes me angry. I mean, my whole orientation is, I'm doing it for the sake of art, and art is incarnated in the artists by the artists who make it. So I have to go at that through the people. So again, I don't say that I'm not, I try different things, frankly, and of course I'm not, I don't spend 24 hours a day doing it. Every now and then I happen on something. Or I see a video, or somebody sends me something, and that inspires me to make a reaction video or to say something on Twitter. So it's
Well, actually,
there's always something that it inspires me to do something.
on that, just for a second, I know you said you were posting things to Odyssey. Have you ever thought about posting your videos directly to X? I have found that with especially certain interviews, it's been very successful and received quite as well as my some of my music videos that I've put, some of the live performances that I've put on X are received actually sometimes better than they are on YouTube. Have you considered beginning to upload directly to X as opposed to?
I've uploaded a few short videos. I don't know if, I'm not sure I can. I mean, also, maybe I could.
Yeah, I would be curious to know if that would.
Next time I make a video, I'll give it a shot. But I don't have a blue check mark or anything.
I didn't think about that. I don't know if you can if you don't have the. Interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
But also, what happens on Twitter is that you post something, and then pretty soon it's lost in the timeline. But I'm open to anything, but I'm also not. I'm quite engaged in the internet, and I've made an awful lot of videos and so on. But I don't try to promote it. It's there are people who follow me, and I'm not trying to. Just it's just something I do when I do it.
Well, fair enough. We're running up on the hour marker, and I told you before. I had told you before that in the first 10 episodes there was the ending question, the sort of a running theme. I'm doing that with these next 10 episodes, and I still try and keep things in the realm of the practical, because one of the problems that I think conversations like these on other mediums have is that there's an inherent disconnect that they have with the audience. Like if I'm a layman and I'm tuning in, what's something that I can take away from the conversation that's relevant to me, in this case, the average layman listener. So the ending question, and the question I'd like to ask you, what is something practical from this conversation that you would like people to take away? Or what is something practical that people can take away and apply into their own lives?
Well, don't you think this gets back to our interaction of a moment ago? Don't you think that to have a more masculine art would mean having a more masculine attitude in general? I mean, I don't really consider myself a very masculine guy, but I mean, there should be more robustness in. I think people have to be more robust. There's got to be. I mean, I think I don't want to blame people for not understanding me, But I know when I was young, and I was even instructed to have this attitude by Aaron Curzon. I was open to criticism. And some people are, but there's an awful lot of defensive. It's not really. It's sort of a defensive self-satisfaction. It's not self-satisfaction. It feels like fearfulness to me, because everyone has to be an artist. Everyone has to be a creator. There's no. In music, it's a little different, but in art, there are no standards. Everybody is their own standard. And because of this Heideggerian mindset that we're in, people feel that unless they are the measure of all things themselves, they're nothing. They feel like existential ciphers. And that's a terrible problem, because if we're going to serve art, we have to feel fulfillment and feel that we have value in serving something. We don't have to be the thing. We don't have to be godlike creators. So that's my attitude about painting. I feel like a servant of painting.
And how can people take away this message practically?
You have to look at painting or music, composing music, I mean, as a thing. It's not a creation of your soul. It's a thing. And you've got to figure out how to do it well. It's something you have to master. And that means and so there are mysteries, and there are mysteries behind mysteries. These are huge things. Musical composition and painting are gigantic arts, and therefore they intimidate everybody, because it's become a psychological problem more than a technical problem. And people can't have a normal attitude. I mean, you should look upon musical composition like cooking. Spice it up a little bit.
Give
it nice and brown.
Marinate it, or caramelize, I suppose, in that case.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. Paul Rhoads, thank you so much for your time. I will be sure to, on the YouTube, I will include your X handle and your Odyssey, or I guess perhaps your webpage would be better. Is there a link to your Odyssey account?
There's a site that a friend made for me, and then there's my Odyssey.
Okay, so in the YouTube description, I will be sure to include that. This episode will come out on Substack first, and then I will put it on X, obviously, and I'll make sure to tag you in that, and YouTube, so that will be available for people to watch. Again, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much.